One of these atrocities committed or inspired by ISIL has occurred in just a month and a half since the Secretary last appeared before this committee. A year and a half since he appeared, and all of these things have happened. Whatever illusions anyone may have had that our national security was not at stake in the conflict in Iraq and Syria, or that ISIL was somehow contained, these attacks make it clear that ISIL's threat against our homeland is real, direct, and growing, that we are not winning this war, and the time is not on our side. Americans have never been more worried about being attacked than at any time since the months that followed September 11, 2001. Today's hearing is essential to help the American people and their elected representatives understand what the Department of Defense is doing to protect our nation from this new terrorist threat. The administration says it has a strategy to destroy ISIL, which it has called, quote, an indirect approach, unquote. This means that instead of taking the fight to ISIL more directly, the administration seeks to build up local ground forces in Iraq and Syria to support them with U.S. and coalition air power, to enable our local partners to liberate their own lands and to create conditions for lasting political settlements. Much of this is what many of us have been advocating for years, and to be sure, we are making some progress. As I recently saw on a visit to Iraq with Senator Graham, the recent operation to retake Sinjar was important. Iraqi forces are closing in on Ramadi, though they still have not finished the job, and our counterterrorism operations are taking a lot of ISIL fighters off the battlefield in Iraq and Syria. All of this represents tactical progress, and it is a testament to our civilian and military leaders, as well as thousands of U.S. troops helping to take the fight to ISIL every day. However, significant challenges remain. The Iraqi government is weak and beholden to Iran. The training of Iraqi security forces has been slow, and the building of support for the Sunni tribal forces even slower. At the current pace, U.S. commanders estimate that ISIL will still control Mosul at the end of next year. In Syria, what the administration calls its strategy looks more like a hope. We will not destroy ISIL until Raqqa, the capital of the caliphate, falls. But there is still no ground force that is both willing and able to retake Raqqa, nor is there a realistic prospect of one emerging soon. The Syrian Kurds could take Raqqa but won't, and the Syrian Sunni Arabs want to but can't, partly due to our failure to support them. What's worse, our military and diplomatic efforts are misaligned. Russia and Iraq are doubling down on Bashar Assad. Russia's airstrikes are still overwhelmingly directed at coalition-supported groups, and more talks in Vienna will not convince Vladimir Putin to abandon his idea of Russia's national interests in Syria. We need leverage to do that, but nothing we are doing, military or otherwise, is creating the necessary conditions, both in Putin's mind as well as on the ground in Syria, to achieve a favorable political settlement. As a result, the conflict will likely grind on, ISIL will grow stronger, and the refugees will keep coming. Meanwhile, ISIS is metastasizing across the region, in Afghanistan, Lebanon, Egypt, Yemen, and perhaps most worryingly, in Libya. In short, the threat is growing and evolving faster than the administration's efforts to counter it. The broader shortcomings of the administration's approach has to do with two assumptions it appears to be making. The first is that time is on our side, that we can afford to play out their indirect approach for years, while ISIL continues to hold key terrain such as Raqqa and Mosul. Time has never been on our side in this conflict, and it certainly is not now, after Sinai, Paris, and San Bernardino. The second assumption is that we should not put U.S. forces on the ground because that's what ISIL wants. It is true that ISIL seeks an apocalyptic conflict with the West, but another key pillar of ISIL's ideology is the creation of the caliphate. So as long as ISIL can claim to possess its caliphate, it projects an aura of success that is its most powerful tool of radicalization and recruitment. There are no local forces that are able and willing to destroy ISIL's caliphate on the ground, and if we will not commit our own forces, then we are accepting the existence of the caliphate. On Sunday, President Obama once again resorted to the straw man argument that his critics want to invade Iraq and Syria with 100,000 U.S. troops. No one is calling for that. What we do need in Iraq is several thousand additional U.S. troops to improve and accelerate the training of Iraqi forces, especially Sunni tribal fighters, embed with and advise Iraqi units closer to the fight, call in airstrikes from forward positions, and conduct counterterrorism operations. Once ISIL is destroyed in Iraq, we must keep a residual force there, as we should have done before. If we leave again, the threat will return, and we will have to intervene again. Iraqis must win the peace, but America has a major stake in their success and a unique role to play in helping them. To do so, we must be present. In Syria, the U.S. needs a coherent strategy to destroy ISIL and end the civil war as soon as possible. Our military efforts must create the conditions for this outcome. America must work with its coalition partners to establish and protect zones inside Syria where refugees can be safe, to deny the Assad regime the use of air power and barrel bombs, and to impose costs on Russia for targeting moderate opposition groups. Ultimately, to destroy ISIL in Syria, we will need a multinational ground force, primarily made up of Sunni Arab and European forces, but with a strong U.S. component, to do what no local force now can or will: retake Raqqa, destroy ISIL's caliphate in Syria, and prepare for a long-term stabilization effort. Beyond Iraq and Syria, we need to seize the initiative and roll back ISIL's regional expansion. This will require a greater forward presence of U.S. military and intelligence teams that can map its networks and destroy them as part of a broader strategy to support countries in building just and inclusive governments. Finally, Mr. Secretary, we have known each other for many years. I know you to be a skilled and dedicated public servant. I think you are performing to the best of your abilities as Secretary of Defense, and I value our partnership on many issues. It is true that you have made 4 appearances before this committee as Secretary, but when you were nominated for your position, you agreed to, quote, appear and testify upon request before this committee. Since your last testimony, as I mentioned, we have seen ISIL launch or inspire attacks in the sky over Egypt, in Beirut, in Paris, and here at home in San Bernardino. We have also heard the administration roll out additional actions that it claims are needed to address this threat. If we are truly at war against ISIL, as the President says, then we will continue to expect the Secretary of Defense to provide regular updates to the Senate Armed Services Committee on the progress of that war. This is your responsibility to us, so we can perform our responsibilities on behalf of those who elected us. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me welcome Secretary Carter and General Selva. This morning's hearing is extraordinarily timely in light of several recent and very disturbing events, including ISIL claiming responsibility for the bombing of the Russian airliner, the attacks on innocent civilians in Beirut and Paris, and the deadly attack in San Bernardino by what appears to be self-radicalized individuals. And our hearts go out to the victims of these terrible and senseless tragedies. As the President outlined in his speech to the nation on Sunday, it is critical that the U.S.-led 60-plus nation coalition for defeating ISIL pursue a multidimensional approach. The United States and its coalition partners are intensifying their efforts to degrade ISIL militarily and deny their leaders any safe havens, to cut off ISIL financing, to interdict the flow of foreign fighters to ISIL-controlled territories, and to counter the spread of ISIL's murderous ideology that the President accurately characterized as part of a cult of death. Such an approach will require the careful coordination of military, intelligence, diplomatic, and law enforcement efforts to combat ISIL across the departments of the U.S. government and within our coalition. Recently, the administration announced a number of steps to intensify our military efforts in Iraq and Syria. These include the deployment of A-10s to Turkey, the addition of special operations forces in northern Syria to assist local forces, and most recently announcement by you, Secretary Carter, of the intent to deploy in full coordination with the government of Iraq an expeditionary targeting force to assist the Iraqi and Kurdish security forces in removing ISIL leaders from the battlefield. In addition, coalition partners, including Britain, France, and Germany, have stepped up their contributions to the fight against ISIL since the Paris attacks. And I welcome, and I think we all do, these continuing efforts to reevaluate and enhance our military campaign, and would be interested in any further steps that may be under consideration to intensify the military pressure on ISIL in Iraq and Syria. And I think we all agree that that intensity has to be increased significantly and rapidly. At the same time, a sustainable defeat of ISIL in the region requires that ground combat forces be primarily local forces, though U.S. forces can, and they should, provide critical advice, assistance, and enablers to assist these forces and go where they must go to assist these local forces. Putting large numbers of U.S. troops on the ground, as has been suggested, I think, by all my colleagues in Iraq and Syria, could play directly or indirectly into ISIL's propaganda war. It's also clear that a sustainable outcome will only be possible with more inclusive governance by the Abadi government in Baghdad and a political transition in Syria that puts an end to the brutality of the Assad regime. Russia's direct engagement in the Syrian conflict will continue to further reduce the chances of achieving an acceptable political solution, so long as the Russians remain focused on attacking the moderate Syrian opposition and claiming to be joining an anti-ISIL fight, while they are, in effect, trying to degrade the anti-Assad forces. We will be interested in hearing from our witnesses regarding the progress of the campaign to defeat ISIL, the status of our efforts to train, equip, and assist local forces in Syria and Iraq, and then having trained them to help them seize territory and hold territory taken from ISIL control. I hope you can also address whether we now have the right command structure for Operation Inherent Resolve, and whether our military commanders in theater have the flexibility they need to carry out the campaign plan. Finally, the committee would be interested to get an assessment from our witnesses of the factors contributing to the expansion of ISIL and associated groups beyond the Syria-Iraq region, as the chairman has pointed out, and what the department needs to counter this threat that is burgeoning throughout the region. Again, thank you to the witnesses, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome, Secretary Carter and General Selva.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member Reed, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to discuss the U.S. counter-ISIL military campaign with Vice Chairman Paul Selva here. Chairman Dunford is, as you know, currently visiting our troops deployed around the world this holiday season, conveying to them the thanks of a grateful nation for all they do in our defense. I will soon be doing the same. And Chairman, you're right, and Ranking Member Reed, we are intensifying the campaign and have in the 6 weeks since I appeared before you last time, and I'm happy to be here today to describe what we're doing. And it's very much along the lines of what you just described, that is forces to accompany, to call an airstrike, to conduct counterterrorism strikes, and train and equip. So I'll describe those actions which we're taking. Because the attacks in Paris and San Bernardino were an assault upon the civilization that we defend. ISIL requires and it will receive a lasting defeat. The President has directed us to intensify and adapt the military campaign, or had directed us to intensify the military campaign before the Paris attacks, and the necessity of accelerating our efforts, as we're doing, has only been made more plain by the recent attacks. We are urging others in the region and around the world to do the same, because those attacks further highlighted the stakes that not just the United States, but the world has in this fight. The defense of the homeland must be strengthened, to be sure, but it is absolutely necessary to defeat ISIL in its parent tumor in Syria and Iraq, and also to take necessary action wherever else in the world this evil organization metastasizes. Achieving these objectives means leveraging all the components of our nation's might, as the Chairman noted: diplomatic, military, and law enforcement, homeland security, intelligence, economic, informational. That's the right overall approach for three principal reasons. First, the strategy takes the fight to the enemy where they are, which we must do. Second, it seeks to develop capable, motivated local ground forces as the only force that can assure a lasting victory. U.S. and international coalition forces can and will do more to enable them, but we cannot substitute for them. And third, it seeks to set the conditions for a political solution to the civil war in Syria and for inclusive governance in Iraq, both of which are essential because they're the only durable ways to prevent a future ISIL-like organization from re-emerging there. And that's why the diplomatic work led by Secretary Kerry is the first and absolutely critical line of effort. The Defense Department, of course, is centrally responsible for the military campaign, which is the focus of my statement today. Through our and our coalition partners' actions, the military campaign must and will deny ISIL any safe territorial haven, kill or capture its leadership and forces, and destroy its organization, all while we seek to identify and then enable motivated local forces on the ground who can expel ISIL from the territory it now controls, hold it and govern it, and ensure that victory sticks. Militarily, we're taking new steps each week to gather momentum on the battlefield in Syria and Iraq. I'll take a few extra minutes this morning to give as much detail as possible about the new things we're doing, applying multiple pressures on multiple fronts simultaneously to accelerate ISIL's defeat. The reality is we're at war. That's how our troops feel about it, because they're taking the fight to ISIL every day, applying the might of the finest fighting force the world has ever known. In northern Syria, local forces, with our support, are fighting along the Mara line, engaging ISIL in the last remaining pocket of access into Turkey. Meanwhile, a coalition of Syrian Arabs that we helped equip in northeastern Syria are fighting alongside Kurdish forces and have recaptured important terrain, most recently pushing ISIL out of the town of al-Hol and at least 900 square kilometers of surrounding territory. They're now focused on moving south to isolate ISIL's so-called capital of Raqqa, with the ultimate objective of collapsing its control over the city. To build on that, President Obama, on my and Chairman Dunford's advice, ordered U.S. Special Operations Forces to go into Syria to support the fight against ISIL. American special operators bring a unique set of capabilities that make them force multipliers, such as intelligence gathering, targeting, and enabling local forces. Where we find further opportunity to leverage such capability, we will not hesitate to expand it. Next, in the south of Syria, we're also taking advantage of opportunities to enable indigenous fighters, trained and equipped by us and other coalition partners, to conduct strikes inside Syria. We're also enhancing Jordan's border control and defenses with additional military assets and planning assistance. Turning to northern Iraq, Peshmerga units, with the help of U.S. air power, and advisors, have retaken the town of Sinjar, cutting the main line of communication between Raqqa and Mosul, which are the two largest cities under ISIL's control. To move people and supplies, ISIL must now rely on back roads, where we will locate and destroy them. Elsewhere in Iraq, we have about 3,500 troops at 6 locations in support of Iraqi security forces. There, we've been providing increased lethal fire and augmenting the existing training, advising, and assisting program. And we're prepared to do more as Iraq shows capability and motivation in the counter-ISIL fight and in resolving its political divisions. After a frustratingly long time, we are starting to see some movement in the operation to recapture Ramadi. Over the past several months, the coalition has provided specialized training and equipment, including combat engineering techniques like in-stride breaching and bulldozing, and munitions like AT-4 shoulder-fired missiles to stop truck bombs, to the Iraqi Army and its counterterrorism service units that are now beginning to enter Ramadi neighborhoods from multiple directions. In fact, in the last 24 hours, the ISF retook the Anbar Operations Center on the northern bank of the Euphrates River across from Ramadi's city center. This is an important step, but there's still tough fighting ahead. ISIL has counterattacked several times, but thus far the ISF has shown resilience. The United States is prepared to assist the Iraqi army with additional unique capabilities to help them finish the job, including attack helicopters and accompanying advisors if circumstances dictate and if requested by Prime Minister Abadi. I mention all this because it represents how we've adapted in the way we support our Iraqi partners, and it shows that training, advising, and assisting helps and works. We will do more of what works going forward. While we're focused on making additional tactical gains, the overall progress in the Sunni-populated areas of Iraq has been slow, much to Prime Minister Abadi's and our frustration. Indeed, with respect to Sunni tribal forces, we are urging the Iraqi government to do more to recruit, train, arm, mobilize, and pay Sunni popular mobilization fighters in their communities. We continue to engage the Iraqi government at all levels to move forward on this critically important aspect of the counter-ISIL campaign, including working with Sunni local police to ensure that there's an Iraqi hold force to sustain future gains. Next, in full coordination again with the government of Iraq, we're deploying a specialized expeditionary targeting force to assist the ISF and Kurdish Peshmerga forces and put even more pressure on ISIL through a variety of raids and intelligence gathering missions. This force will also be in a position to conduct unilateral operations in Syria. In Iraq, the force will operate at the invitation of the Iraqi government and focus on defending its borders and building the ISF's ability to conduct similar operations. We will not be discussing specifics of this expeditionary targeting force or its operations in unclassified settings, both to protect our forces and to preserve the element of surprise. We want this expeditionary targeting force to make ISIL and its leaders wonder when they go to bed at night who's going to be coming in the window. Chairman Dunford and I recognize that in principle there are alternatives to the strategic approach we have adopted to drive ISIL from Syrian and Iraqi territory, including the introduction of a significant foreign ground force, hypothetically international, but including U.S. forces, even in the absence of capable, motivated local ground forces. While we certainly have the capability to furnish a U.S. component to such a ground force, we have not recommended this course of action for several reasons. In the near term, it would be a significant undertaking that, much as we may wish otherwise, realistically we would embark upon largely by ourselves. And it would be ceding our comparative advantage of special forces, mobility, and firepower, instead fighting on the enemy's terms. In the medium term, by seeming to Americanize the conflicts in Iraq and Syria, we could well turn those fighting ISIL or inclined to resist their rule into fighting us instead. As Chairman Dunford testified last week, quote, ISIL would love nothing more than a large presence of U.S. forces on the ground in Iraq and Syria so that they could have a call to jihad. And lastly, in the long term, there would still remain the problem of securing and governing the territory. These must be done by local forces. So in the end, while we can enable them, we cannot substitute for them. Next, momentum on the ground, as I've described, in both Syria and Iraq has been enabled by greatly increased coalition airstrikes. Additional strike aircraft we've deployed to Incirlik Air Base in Turkey, along with improved intelligence, allowed us in November to significantly increase our airstrikes against ISIL to the highest level since the start of our operations in August 2014. Moreover, because of improved intelligence and understanding of ISIL's operations, we've intensified the air campaign against ISIL's war-sustaining oil enterprise, a critical pillar of ISIL's financial infrastructure. In addition to destroying fixed facilities like wells and processing facilities, we've destroyed nearly 400 of ISIL's oil tanker trucks, reducing a major source of its daily revenues. There's more to come, too. We're also improving our capability to eliminate ISIL's leadership. Since I last appeared before this committee in late October, we have removed 2 more key ISIL figures from the battlefield, namely Jihadi John, an ISIL executioner, and Abu Nabil, ISIL's leader in Libya. Like previous actions, these strikes serve notice to ISIL that no target is beyond our reach. And as our military campaign intensifies on the ground and in the air, the Defense Department is also developing more strategic options in the cyber domain. These, then, are just 9 areas of the adaptations we've made over the past 6 weeks to accelerate this campaign and to see momentum build. President Obama is committed to doing what it takes as opportunities arise, as we see what works, and as the enemy adapts until ISIL is defeated in a lasting way. The President has consistently supported the recommendations from me and General Dunford, and we know he is prepared for us to bring him more. We will. At the same time that we're constantly looking to do more in this fight, the world must do the same. The international community, including our allies and partners, has to step up before another attack like Paris. France was galvanized by the attack on its capital and intensified its role. Britain has now expanded its air campaign to strike ISIL in Syria. Italy has deployed its most elite police units, like the Carabinieri, to assist in Iraq. Germany is now making additional contributions, and the Netherlands is actively considering doing more as well. But we all, let me repeat that, all must do more. Turkey must do more to control its often porous border. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states joined the air portion of the campaign in the early days, only the air part, but have since been preoccupied by the conflict in Yemen, both in the air and on the ground. And just this past week, I personally reached out to my counterparts in 40 countries around the world in the coalition and asked them to contribute more, in many cases contribute much more, to enhancing the fight against ISIL. The types of things I've requested from our partners include special operations forces, strike and reconnaissance aircraft, weapons and munitions, training assistance, and other items. Meanwhile, as the chairman noted, Russia, which is publicly committed to defeating ISIL, has instead largely attacked opposition forces. It's time for Russia to focus on the right side of this fight. Before I conclude, I'd like to respectfully request the committee's attention to matters that bear upon our security and its responsibilities. First, over a month ago, I submitted a request to the 4 congressional defense committees, including this one, to release holds on the final tranche of funds in the Syria equipping program. That is, some $116 million. We need these funds to provide and transport ammunition, weapons, and other equipment to further enable the progress being made against ISIL in Syria by partners like the Syrian Arab Coalition. All 4 committees have failed to act on that request, and I ask you to release these holds urgently. We should not be impeding the very momentum we are trying to build. Next is the necessity to fill key vacancies in the Defense Department's critical leadership positions. I have appeared before this committee, as noted, 6 times over the last 10 months, 4 times on the Middle East and twice in just the last 6 weeks on ISIL. While this committee has held 58 full hearings over the last year, only 3 have been confirmation hearings for DoD civilian leaders. DoD currently has 16 nominees awaiting the constitutional advice and consent of the Senate. 12 of these 16 are still awaiting even a hearing, including our nominees to be Secretary of the Army, the undersecretaries of each of our 3 military departments, Army, Navy, and Air Force, and the undersecretaries of both intelligence and personnel and readiness. These positions should be filled by confirmed nominees, especially in a time of conflict. So I welcome that the process is now moving, and I urge it to move quickly for all of our civilian nominees and also for our senior military nominations that will be made early next year. Finally, as I conclude, I want to commend this committee on last month's budget deal, which is the kind of deal I called for back in March. It was a consequential agreement for the nation's security. As current funding for the government is set to expire, it is vital that the two houses now conclude work on funding all of the government consistent with the budget deal. Now is not the time for more gridlock. I thank this committee in advance for your efforts, because funding this budget deal is what our national security demands. And it sends the right message to our troops, our allies, and our enemies in this time of broad global national security challenges, and especially in this war. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response, Mr. Secretary, in response to your last 2 points, one on the funding, we just received that request last week, but you know very well it's a result of the absolute failure of the expenditure of what was judged then to be $43 million, and 4 or 5 people were trained. We don't want to approve of something like that again. We want to, if you want that kind of funding to train and equip, we want to know what the plan is, and we don't want to see a repetition of a testimony by the head of Central Command who said, well, we have 4 or 5 less, and we've spent $43 million. We have an obligation to the taxpayers. On the nominees, there's 4 pending before the United States Senate today, and there is 4 more who will be having hearings this afternoon, which takes care of half of yours, and I'm not going to waste the time of the committee to go back and forth about threats of vetoes that, in the view of the majority of this committee, were totally unjustified on the part of the President, including the failure still, despite your appearance in my office with the President's counterterrorism person, that you were going to send me a plan. You were going to send this committee a plan on the closure of Guantanamo. We still haven't gotten that plan, Mr. Secretary. So if you're a little bit concerned about a lack of movement, I've been a little concerned about a lack of movement on Guantanamo for the last 7 years.
Right.
So I will do what I can to get the 4 that are pending before the Senate today confirmed by the Senate, and we will be having a hearing this afternoon on the 4 additional ones. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that.
Mr. Secretary, on the 1st of December, before the House Armed Services Committee, Congressman Forbes asked General Dunford, quote, have we currently contained ISIL? General Dunford, we have not contained ISIL. Mr. Secretary, do you agree with General Dunford?
I agree with what General Dunford said, yes.
So if we have not contained, ISIL, how are we to believe that we are succeeding against ISIL?
I think that we are building momentum against ISIL. I'm going to be very careful about describing I've described the trajectory of that success all around Iraq and Syria. Some actions we're taking in Libya. It's not my principal responsibility, but I met yesterday with the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Director of the FBI, the Director of National Intelligence, and other officials to talk about what we could do more to strengthen the defense of the homeland as the Department of Defense. But in our principal responsibility, which is to take the fight to Syria and Iraq, I've described the actions that we've taken just since I appeared last time, and I think they are building momentum.
Thank you. How long do you think it'll be before we retake Mosul or Raqqa?
With respect to Mosul, Mr. Chairman, it is hard to say because that depends much on the progress of the Iraqi security forces, which I described in building themselves into a more capable combat force. With respect to Ramadi, as I described, Raqqa. Well, Raqqa, there, and you noted this yourself, Mr. Chairman, the Syrian Kurds to the north have done an excellent job of clearing their territory, working with the Syrian Arabs.
They're not going to go into Raqqa, and you and I know that.
Oh, they're not going to go to Raqqa. No. It'll be the Syrian Arabs.
I guess the point is, Mr. Secretary, here we are with attacks on the homeland, the United States of America. We have not contained ISIL, and we have no timeline. The timeline I was given when Senator Graham and I went over there was at least the end of next year before Mosul, and there is no plan, no strategy to retake Raqqa. And I think it's pretty obvious to all that as long as they have the caliphate base, then they are able to orchestrate attacks such as they've successfully achieved in the last several weeks, whether it be the Ankara Russian airliner, southern Beirut, Paris, or San Bernardino. So here we are with and you described some measures that are probably very helpful, but with no timeline of which to take out the caliphate, from which there are many things happening, including, according to news reports, developing chemical weapons. So, and this is why I'm really puzzled. This morning, by the way, on one of the news shows, a former head of the United States Army, Chief of Staff of the United States Army, General Odierno, said we ought to have American contingent of troops on the ground. And I frankly do not understand the logic in your statement about, said, well, you certainly have the capability to furnish a U.S. component in such a ground force. We've not recommended because it would be a significant undertaking. I agree. We would have to do it largely by ourselves. I do not agree. It would be ceding our comparative advantage. We'd be in the medium term, it would seem to Americanize the conflicts. Does anybody really believe that if the United States struck back against the people that just slaughtered some Americans in San Bernardino, that somehow that would encourage them? What encourages them, Mr. Secretary, is success. And they have a pretty serious record here of success just in the last couple of months since you were here. So I do not understand why in the world you wouldn't want, as General Keane, the architect of the surge, the successful surge, and others, military leaders, including this morning, former Chief Staff of the United States Army, a small component of American forces with an international force, which could be, if the United States had the credibility, could be gathered and then go in and take out this caliphate. As long as the caliphate, I know of no expert who doesn't believe that as long as this caliphate exists in Raqqa, they're going to be able to orchestrate attacks and metastasize and maybe even move to Libya. So maybe you can help the committee out again that this would somehow cede a comparative advantage if we went in with a large Arab force, the Turks and Egyptians even and other Sunni nations, and go in there and take those people out. There's 20 to 30,000 of them. They are not giants. So, but finally, someone's going to have to convince me that air power alone and special operations forces are going to succeed in the short term in order to prevent further things such as San Bernardino. I'd love to hear your response.
A couple of things, Mr. Chairman. First of all, to your main point about more American forces, and I would say special forces, but others as well that train, advise, assist, and accompany that are not special forces. I was
talking about a multinational force.
Well, there, Mr. Chairman, as I indicated, I too wish that particularly the Sunni Arab nations of the Gulf would do more. And going way back,
they are willing to do so if there's a United States commitment.
I've had lengthy conversations with representatives there. Well, I have to say that I have consistently emphasized to them that they have a unique role here. And also, insofar as they're concerned about Iran, which is another concern they have, and by the way, that we have also, a totally different but serious subject also, that what I've emphasized to them is that we don't like it, but the Iranians are in the game on the ground. And I very much would like, and we would very much welcome, and we've repeatedly said this, working with those countries on the ground, because we believe, as you noted, that they would have a distinctive advantage in a ground fight. With respect to the Europeans have, generally speaking, offered to do more within their capabilities and capacities. I will note here, and this is uneven across Europe, but in general, I am quite concerned with the level of investment that Europe is making in its militaries and its alliance and partnership, therefore, with the United States. There's much more that their economies would enable them to do, and that their history as standing up for the same kind of civilized values that we stand up with really require of them. And so, while we're getting more from the Europeans, and I indicated I've asked for more, I'd like there to be still more. So in that sense, I completely am with you. I simply, on the basis of my urgent and persistent consultations with them, am less have less high hopes, perhaps, than you, that they would assemble such a force. We would certainly welcome that. With that, I also don't want to...
Could I just say that I urgently and fervently ask you for a strategy that you can tell us when we're going to take Mosul, when we're going to take Raqqa, and when we're going to wipe out this caliphate. And frankly, I have not seen that. General, did you want to add anything?
Sir, I would add 3 points. First, agree completely that defending the homeland is our top priority. Second, taking the fight...
That's helpful.
Taking the fight to the caliphate is what is going on today in Iraq and Syria. The combination of increasing the momentum with the movements in Iraq, in Beji, as well as in Ramadi, and partnering with Syrian...
And again, General, there's no timeline for Mosul and Raqqa, which is the basis of the caliphate.
Sir, the fight on the ground defines the progress we will make against the caliphate. We have put significant pressure on northern Syria. We have taken, with Syrian Arab coalition partners, have taken significant ground in the north and the east of Syria. They are using the equipment that we have provided to put pressure on ISIL's main lines of communication between Raqqa and Mosul. To provide a timeline would deny the fact that the enemy on the ground gets a vote, but they do not have freedom of maneuver. They do not have operational freedom of maneuver. They do not have tactical freedom of maneuver.
General, they were just able to orchestrate an attack in San Bernardino, California. My time is long ago expired. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, we've all come to the conclusion we need American forces on the ground. The question, very generically, is how many and what are they going to do? This is a unique situation, but we've got some analogies, or at least examples. One, in Enduring Freedom, we sent in specialized teams of U.S. personnel and air power, and together with local forces were able to disrupt and then ultimately defeat the Taliban. In Iraqi freedom, we sent in conventional forces. We won a very swift and brilliant conventional victory, and then were confronted with instability and counterinsurgency. It would seem to me that you're tending to favor the former model, which would be to have specialized troops in there with our air power, et cetera, and that the constraining factor right now is the local indigenous forces on the ground, particularly Arab forces, not Kurdish forces, but Arab forces. And I am told there's about 100 sort of new Syrian fighters that have been trained, that are on the ground, that are the potential Can you elaborate on those comments?
I can. First of all, with respect to the Afghan experience, I agree with your general analysis of the history of those two incidents. That was a circumstance in 2001 and 2002 where we were able very rapidly and extremely effectively to leverage a pre-existing indigenous force, namely largely the Northern Alliance, which we had over the previous decade or so built up in order to fight the Soviets. And they actually succeeded in expelling the Soviets from Afghanistan. That force, that organization, and other organizations of the so-called Mujahideen in those days, we could quickly link up with again. And by providing them enabling exactly in this manner, they would advance. That would cause the Taliban to expose their positions, and we could cream them from the air. And so that was a perfect example, ideal. We'd like to replicate that. Of course, in this current circumstances in Syria and Iraq, we're having to build those forces, and they don't exist in the same way that they did in the Northern Alliance. With respect to the new Syrian forces, and it gets back to the funding issue, we did change our approach to training and equipping Syrian forces. Our early experience there was disappointing. I've said that. I always told you I'm going to be very honest about things. It didn't work out very well because we were trying to build units from scratch. And what the new approach, and by the one we're asking you to fund, and we are providing, I'm willing to send up a team today to brief you further on what we're looking for, but we really need this agility if we're going to fight a war. So I plead with you to take the briefings or whatever. We have a reason for requesting this money. It's different from the old program. We learned our lesson. We're doing something different, which is this. We're taking units that have already formed and have undertaken to combat ISIL. The Syrian Arab Coalition is an example of that. And instead of trying to create a brand new force or recruit a brand new force, and then put them, including by being on the ground with them, but especially equipping them and providing them with air power, amplifying their power. And we hope, and this gets to the chairman's question about a timeline for Raqqa, that if we make them successful as they move further south, remember now these are Syrian Arabs, not Kurds, as the chairman rightly noted, wouldn't be appropriate for us to attack largely Arab Raqqa, that they and their success will build, so to speak, a snowball that accumulates more fighters as they go. As that accumulates and there are more of them, we'll do more to fall in behind them with the objective then of them taking Raqqa, which would be a very important victory in the heart of ISIL territory.
Thank you. General, quickly, the command arrangements. General McFarland is now the Joint Commander with operational control both in Iraq and Syria, I understand. Are you satisfied, and General Dunford satisfied, that you have the best framework for command now to integrate all of the DoD elements and ancillary elements you need?
Yes, sir. The Joint Task Force command structure in Baghdad that covers both Iraq and Syria is more than adequate to cover the military maneuver that's required and to orchestrate the forces that are required, and has the support of Central Command's headquarters as a oversight and supporting headquarters.
And they have the flexibility to make critical decisions in a timely way without sort of second-guessing up and down the line?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your remarks. There's a great deal of frustration, Secretary Carter, and concern that we're drifting and reacting and don't have the kind of plan that will lead to success, number one. Number two, I understand now the President says he wants an authorization of force, but because of the difficulties and bungling, I think, that we've seen so far, we're going to have to know what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, how it's going to be successful. That is not clear. It's not clear to the American people. It's not clear to Congress, not clear to our European allies, our allies in the Middle East. or our enemies. That's a problem we've got. It's just very real. Secondly, I think that Secretary Gates was correct to say we need an overarching strategy for this whole deal with Islamic extremism in maybe 20, 30, 50 years. And we've used the word containment to deal with that. However, that does not mean that in a long-term strategy of containment of extremism that we don't have to act decisively and militarily now. And I just think, and I shared with you, that I believe the Defense Department is underestimating the significance of the refugee crisis, the impact it's having in Europe, the impact it's having in the United States, what's happening from all this disorder and the flee of human beings and the deaths that's being caused and the humanitarian disaster that's out there. So it seems to me, does it not to you, that a prompt, decisive action to create safe zones in Syria where people don't have to flee their home country, can be kept safe there, would be positive as a matter of humanity and as a military possibility.
Thank you, Senator. I'll begin, including on the safe zones, and then perhaps ask the Vice Chairman to add in. He's done a lot of work on that as well. I'll just note with respect to the AOMF that we have the I'm not a lawyer, but I'm told, and I'm glad, otherwise it would be a problem, we have the authority, legal authority to do what we want to do. And the AMF, as I've testified, that the President submitted would also allow us to do everything we need to do in this campaign.
Well, just don't blame Congress for not rubber stamping it immediately.
Yeah, no, I understand.
If we don't understand what the
I think
deal
it's
is.
okay. In fact, I didn't even mention it for just that reason. You're right, and I associate myself with you about acting decisively. I do recognize that there may be decades of combating radicalism in general, but we need to go after ISIL in its parent tumor in Iraq and Syria now and urgently, and so I associate myself with that point of view. Refugees is a tragic matter, and by the way, just a reminder that only about half of the refugees are actually from Syria, and they're also importantly from Libya, from Afghanistan, from throughout Africa, and while there are women and children and caught up in this circumstance, the great bulk of them are young people, mostly male, and professionally oriented, who are looking for work. That's why German companies are at the train station recruiting them off the trains for their companies. That's the reality. But what does that mean for the countries from which they come? It's a tremendous talent drain as well as a humanitarian issue. So all the more reason why, particularly in Syria, to the extent that's a major part of the refugee crisis, we have to get an end to the civil war there and get a government that can govern decently, and Assad's government is not that. With respect to safe zones, we have thought about that. I've certainly thought about that a great deal. I'll begin and describe the concept of a safe zone would be to create a patch of Syria wherein people who are inclined to go there could go there and be protected. They would need to be protected because you can foresee that at least ISIL and other radical groups, and quite possibly elements of the Assad regime, would undertake to prove that it wasn't safe. And so it would have to be made safe. And that takes us back to the question of what's an appropriate force of that size to protect a zone of that size. And in our estimates, it's substantial. And again, I don't see, much as I wish otherwise, anybody offering to furnish that force. I also think we have thought about who might want to reside in such a zone. I think it would be undesirable if it became a place into which people were pushed. say from Turkey or Europe, expelled, so to speak, into this zone. I don't know what the people who now live in the zone would think about other people coming into the zone. That would have to be taken into account, and whether other people want to live there. So so we have thought about it. It's complicated. We have not recommended that because it's an undertaking of substantial scale where my judgment, the costs outweigh the benefits. Let me ask General Selva.
Just before you answer, a major European ambassador told me that the Europeans have recommended that, and the United States has said no. Is that correct?
No European defense leader has indicated a willingness to do that and contribute to a force to do that.
Well, I asked him twice. I said, so you've recommended that, and the United States is the one saying no, and that's what he said, yes.
I haven't observed that, no.
Senator
Thank you.
Yates.
If you would disagree with any of these statements, I'm going to summarize a letter that General Austin sent to Senator King about what is the situation in the fight against ISIL. Number one, ISIL is losing territory, correct? I won't go into all the details that delineate the territory they've lost, but because I don't want to take the time, but certainly it's factually available to any member of the committee or any American. Secondly, ISIL is losing leadership, correct?
Yes.
We have in fact taken out more than 100 of ISIL's leadership, including the special ops taking out their chief financial officer, where we gained a great deal of intelligence about what was funding ISIL. And secondly, airstrikes taking out their online recruiting campaign, the cyber caliphate, and also the top commander in Libya, correct?
That's all. And Jihadi John, the executioner, another one of note, but there are many, yes.
And we have taken, and they're losing funding, correct?
That is correct.
We have, the coalition airstrikes have destroyed hundreds of oil transport trucks just in the last 30 days, correct?
That's true.
In addition to oil operations infrastructure that we have taken out with our airstrikes.
True also.
Okay, so one of our colleagues who is not here today, which is interesting considering this would be a pretty important hearing if you're running for president, he has said, quote, this is Senator Cruz has said, we will utterly destroy ISIS. We will carpet bomb them into oblivion. I don't know if sand can glow in the dark, but we're going to find out. How many women and children would be involved if we carpet bombed the areas where ISIS is currently a stronghold? What are we talking about in terms of lives lost of women and children in those areas? Does anybody have an estimate?
Senator, I'll let General Selva speak. That is, of course, not our approach, and we are very effective from the air, but we take some pains.
We're surgical.
Able to be effective. We're able to be effective while minimizing collateral damage.
And one of the reasons the locations we took out was so important is now we've forced their transport trucks out into the open where we can find them and take them out. Whereas when they're in the city center, we kill thousands of innocent people, correct?
Senator, our process is to be as deliberate as possible, as careful as we can with the intelligence that we have, and to discriminately strike targets and avoid civilian collateral damage. That has been our process since day one. It has proven very effective, and that's where I would end the comment.
And isn't the biggest danger to the homeland the ability of this extreme jihad viewpoint being transferred to Americans and then become radicalized and do what these people did in San Bernardino? Isn't that the biggest threat to our homeland?
Senator, it's clear from ISIL's strategy that their objective is to cause us to engage in what they believe is an apocalyptic war with the West. And anything that we do to feed that particular frame of thinking counters our national security. And we have to be very careful about how we prosecute a campaign that appears to be an indiscriminate attempt to attack ISIL and the population that surrounds it.
If we did an indiscriminate carpet bombing of a major area and killed thousands of women and children, would you assume that would have some impact on their ability to recruit misguided barbarians like this couple that took out more than a dozen innocent people last week? I would have to assume it would put their recruiting on steroids.
Senator, I'm going to avoid anything hypothetical. What I would say categorically is the process you described as your hypothetical question is not the way that we apply force in combat. It isn't now, nor will it ever be.
Ever.
No, ma'am.
If we cleared out Raqqa, which I have no doubt that our military could do, if we could clear out Raqqa or Ramadi, do we have any local force capable of providing security on the ground in those locations ongoing?
Senator, I can't talk specifically about Raqqa because we don't have that kind of intelligence on Raqqa. In the case of Ramadi, there is a predominantly Sunni police force that is ready to follow in behind the force that is attempting to take Ramadi back. And it is the intention of the Iraqi government to put that police force in place. I don't at this instant have the numbers. I can provide them for you if you'd like them.
But in Raqqa, are we aware of any force that is available to secure and hold Raqqa if we were able to take it out? Or would we have to stay as long as it took?
The forces that we are aware of at this point are the Syrian Democratic Forces that are working with Kurdish partners that are willing to put pressure on Raqqa. It's not clear that that force is large enough to be the hold force and the security force that would follow. That is one of the reasons that we have advocated and gotten authorities to put special ops forces into Syria to build that depth of intelligence to understand which forces are available to put increasing pressure and a hold force into Raqqa.
Thank you very much.
You don't want to neglect World War II, General Selva, as far as carpet bombing is concerned. Senator Sullivan has asked for to take precedence over his colleagues.
Fix this mic here. Thanks. Having a mic issue. Mr. Secretary General, good to see you. I think one of the things you're hearing here as a common theme, really from all our colleagues, is this sense of urgency. So you're laying out the strategy, and I think some of the elements that you've highlighted in your testimony look like they're useful elements of strategy, but there's a strong belief that there's a lack of sense of urgency here. And I think one only had to watch the press conference between President Obama and President Hollande, and you saw one leader who was very urgent. He was going around the world trying to get our allies motivated on this, and you saw another leader, unfortunately it was our president, was very passive. And I think no matter what the strategy is, if there's not engaged American leadership, serious leadership, that people believe that we're in there and committed to this strategy, we're not going to be able to do any of these things. We talk about an Arab army force. They're not going to follow unless they believe we're fully committed. So I think that's one of the elements of the frustration that you see among the members on the committee today. Let me ask you in terms of strategy. Now, this is a bit of a difficult question, but let's say that there's another kind of San Bernardino event, but maybe much bigger in our country. Maybe 200 Americans killed in ISIS-directed attack on Americans. Would we keep the same strategy right now? Or would we keep the same strategic patience, as the White House calls it? Assume you had a crystal ball and you saw that coming 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now, where 200 Americans are killed by, would you be satisfied that this should be the strategy?
As far as the military campaign is concerned, Senator, I just want to say I share your sense of urgency. And as far
But it doesn't seem like the President does, and I think that's a real common, even members of his own party have indicated that.
He has encouraged General Dunford and me, and we have encouraged all of our subordinate commanders, as was said before, to propose ways to accelerate the campaign, and he has approved all the ones we've proposed so far. We expect to propose more, as I indicated, and to gather momentum in this campaign. With respect to others following,
So let me ask just the question, if you can address the question I asked. Assume there's a Paris-like attack, 200 Americans killed. God forbid it happens, right? None of us want that to happen. But let's say that happens, and it's directed by ISIS. Would you go back to the president saying keep the same strategy?
well, look, Senator, if I had more to recommend to him to accelerate the defeat of ISIL in Syria and Iraq, I'd be doing it now.
But isn't that the key question, that we want to make sure we don't have 200 Americans killed in an ISIS-like attack? So we should be doing everything now, so we don't have to be motivated to do it once it happens?
I think, again, on the military campaign, it is, as I said, with respect to Homeland Security, and here I'd have to refer you to Secretary Johnson.
But they're all related, as you know.
Of course. And so forth. I know that you all are considering various provisions of the law that affect visa waivers and so forth. I think there are probably some improvements and steps that can be taken in that direction. And if there are, again, I would refer you to Secretary Johnson and Director Comey and Attorney General Lynch and others on that.
Well, Mr. Secretary, I think it's
them.
important. We can't wait for an attack, a big attack, we've already just had one, on our country to get the president engaged and more urgent. I think that's the frustration that you're seeing. Let me ask a related question on urgency. Do you believe that the longer ISIS holds territory, that increases risk to the homeland? You think so if they hold more territory and they continue to do so, does that increase risk to our citizens here at home?
Whenever a terrorist group finds safe haven somewhere from which to plot against the United States, that's a danger to the United States. We've been pursuing such groups since 9/11 and actually before, and we have to do that with respect to ISIL today. So yes, that's absolutely right.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. I appreciate very much your service, too. Secretary Carter, I think that, the frustration, I can just speak for the constituents in West Virginia, all the good people and all the military that we have from West Virginia. They asked me the question, what's the end game this time? Is it going to repeat what we've done before? We're going to get bogged down for 10 years or more again, and American men and women and our National Guard people put on the front line in jeopardy. So if ISIS or Assad would fall, if we're able to make that transition, how do we prevent that being filled by another terrorist group? Because, we start out with the Taliban we heard about first, then Al-Qaeda, then all the spin-offs of Al-Qaeda, and then ISIS came about. So they believe that basically when you cut the head off, you can't kill the snake. And that's what they're concerned about. How do you ever have an end game that has any type of normality or normality from that area, if it's even possible?
Well, I've been speaking obviously mostly of the military campaign and the urgent need to crush ISIL. You're asking a very good question, and I said the political line of effort is fundamental here, because in order to have what you're correctly identifying as the end state that will keep the peace in the long run, there has to be, first of all, in Syria, a political transition from Assad to a government that includes some of the opposition, the moderate opposition that's been countering him, and preserves some of the structure of the government of Syria so people can have a government there that functions and is decent. And in Iraq, a government along the lines that Prime Minister Abadi says, and I believe he's genuine, he's trying to create there, which is one, he calls it, I think, a decentralized Iraq, namely one in which the different sectarian elements of Iraqi territory, namely Sunnis and Shia and Kurds, can remain one state, but have enough autonomy within their different areas that they're not going at each other. That's absolutely fundamental in both of those places.
Secretary, if I could ask this question, I think the perfect, have we identified anybody, any group that we think can take over if Assad's put aside to where are we able to come to an agreement? And we have to come to agreement, I would assume, with Russia, because they're much involved in that. Iran seems to have an awful lot of input in that. And are we three going to be able to come to agreement of a new leadership in that's going to bring the rebels, so-called friendly rebels, in, and everyone turns their efforts towards ISIL?
I'd have to refer you to Secretary Kerry on that matter, but I think that's exactly what he's trying to do. And in addition to the three parties you mentioned, namely us and the Russians and the Iranians, and of course the Russians and the Iranians are on the working in the wrong direction at the moment, so it means getting them turned around. But also, I might note all the Sunni Gulf states that we've talked about otherwise would need to be involved as well. And that's the end state that will keep the peace in Syria.
Can you give me insight? I understand that they're currently meeting in Saudi Arabia now, talking about all of these things that we're talking about right now. Why hasn't the YPG or the Syrian Kurds been involved in these talks? Why do you think they haven't, which seem to be the most effective ground troops we have in Syria right now, of them leading some charges, and they're not even asked to be at the table? Would that be because we're trying to please the Saudis and not upset the Turks, or?
Can I get back to you on that question? I don't know where diplomatically. I mean, we are obviously in touch with them. Secretary Kerry knows that, is involved with them. I simply would have to give you.
And the other thing I'd like to get your
answer.
opinion on is that, we've been talking about what do we do for the visa waivers, and I've had a lot of conversation with different people from that part of the world that basically have located in West Virginia, and they understand that we have to have a much tougher, much stronger vetting process, or they don't want to relax that at all. The other thing they would be acceptable to is biometric scanning. And I'm thinking biometric scanning, people can change their name, they can change their appearance, they can't change who they are. And to me, I think the American people would be a lot more comfortable if we go down that path and says there will be no more visas coming to this country unless you've had biometric scanning, we know who you are. And that's something that's accepted, I think. And is that something that you think in your thought process would be feasible, we could do?
I really need to defer you to the Department of Homeland Security and so forth on that, Senator. It's a very good question. I just simply don't know a good answer.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
I want to thank you both for being here. General Selva, could you tell us what percentage of U.S. sorties are returning in the fight right now against ISIS without dropping munitions?
Madam Senator, it depends on which day and which targets that we're talking about, but roughly 40% come back every day, not having struck dynamic targets with weapons still aboard.
So let me ask you this. We asked Central Command recently whether or not the Department of Defense JTACs are operating outside of operation centers. And basically what we heard back is that they weren't. And so I would like to hear from you, Secretary Carter, and you, General Selva. I mean, we know that one of the things that makes our airstrikes even more effective are the forward air controllers on the ground calling them in. And what is our position, in fact, on embedding JTACs, whether it's with the Kurds or Iraqi forces, so that we can more effectively bomb ISIS and take out the most productive targets to defeat them?
First, I'll note a very good memory I have of your coming to the Pentagon with a number of JTACs.
I did, and I appreciate we met with the JTAC associations, and thank you for doing that.
Oh, thank you. I was very grateful, and they're great people because they represent veterans of a great capability. And that's when we talk about American comparative advantage. This is one of the things we are incomparably good at, and that is very effective when we do it. And the answer to your question is yes. We are doing. I want to be careful about what we're doing actually today as I speak, but we are doing that, accompanying people who have those, and by the way, other skills, intelligence skills, and other skills that allow us to leverage a local force and make it much more powerful by bringing in the full weight of America's might behind it. And it's the JTACs and those kind of skills that create that connection between a motivated local force and the might of American power. General Selva, you want to say anything about JTACs?
Senator, in areas where we're not able to accompany to the nearest point of contact, we have actually trained Syrian Arabs, members of the new Syrian forces, as well as our Iraqi partners, to provide the kind of precision target identification that's necessary. And then we're passing that back through JTACs to be vetted in op centers.
Well, I'm glad to hear this, because what we were hearing before is that they were only in the op centers. And obviously, when possible, getting them at the battalion level is going to make the difference. So we can train all the other people we want, but we know our guys are the best, and women who do this, and that they're going to be able to call in these airstrikes. And we got 40% returning. We can increase that percentage dramatically by having the right information on the ground. One question I've gotten a lot of is, you know, I saw in your testimony, Secretary Carter, that we've taken out 400 ISIS fuel trucks at this point. And I appreciated the report that there were 116 of those taken out with the help of A-10s. But why did it take so long for us to go after assets like the fuel trucks, knowing where they were? And I think there's a lot of people that have asked that. And are we going to be more aggressive in really going after these assets going forward?
Yes, we're going to be more aggressive, and what made it possible was intelligence that we didn't have before. And that is what allowed us to identify those parts of the oil infrastructure that are being used to fund ISIL. We greatly increased our insight into that infrastructure in recent months. And this is one of the ways that, as our intelligence, which I have to say when I started out, had a lot of improvement to be done in there in terms of collection and graininess of data and so forth, is getting a lot better. And that is also a huge enabler, because when those JTACs call in airstrikes, it's based upon an intelligence foundation. That's getting better. That is what made the critical difference in our ability to go after the energy infrastructure.
So I don't want to interrupt, but I need to, since my time's almost up, on a really important topic before we leave, and that's Iran. We've now been informed that Iran has made another missile test on November 21st. We know that previously they made a missile test on October 10th in violation of existing UN resolutions. And as far as I can tell, in raising this with the administration, nothing has been happening, no response. And these are certainly, our own ambassador to the UN has said the October 10th clear violation of the UN resolution. You and I have talked, Secretary Carter, about the importance of stopping them from having ICBM capability, yet they continue to test in violation of UN resolutions. What's our response?
Well, what we're doing in the Defense Department, and Ray, remember we discussed this shortly after the nuclear deal was made with Iran, is basically we continue to deter Iran, to counter its malign influence, to have a military presence in the region, which is oriented not only toward the urgent need to defeat ISIL in its homeland, but we also have to remember we need to deter and counter Iran as well. And as far as its ballistic missile program is concerned, as you know, we're making some improvements in our, both qualitative and quantitative, in our missile defense system. That's principally oriented towards North Korea at the moment, but it's also a capability that would be relevant against Iran in the unfortunate event, which so that sometime in the future they were able, as we discussed earlier, to field an ICBM. On the specific matter of this missile test, I refer you to the U.S. UN or the State Department on that. But on the military side, we are continuing unchanged in our need to deter and counter Iranian malign influence in the region.
Let me just say this. I'm all for, I've been long supporting enhancing our missile defense system in this country, but there already are existing UN resolutions that they're in violation of, that in testing these missiles, and if we don't respond to their violations, in a very forceful way, then this agreement, we might as well tear this JCPOA up, because it doesn't matter. Because this issue is already a demonstration of them really backing off on international commitments with this agreement pending.
Before I recognize Senator Donnelly, Mr. Secretary, you may want to correct the record. We all knew those fuel trucks were moving back and forth. We've seen them. We knew it. The decision was not made by the White House to attack them. I think you may want to correct the record, because I certainly knew.
I can, not a matter of correction at all. I can clarify if that would help. That is the case, and what the air commanders were able to do was identify those trucks, and in a classified setting, I can describe exactly how that information was obtained, which were directly supporting ISIL. We have and continue to try to withhold attacks upon that part of the general infrastructure, energy, electricity, water, et cetera, that is also necessary for the people of Syria, and we're trying to peel off that which which ISIL uses and command and controls for its own revenue source. We're now able to make that distinction, which is what enabled the airstrikes, Chairman. And with regard to where that intelligence came from and so forth, I'd be happy to have somebody come up and tell you in a classified manner.
I'll be glad to, but I repeat, we knew those fuel trucks were moving back and forth. We saw them, and through ISR, and the decision was not made in the White House to attack them or not. You can't tell me they were moving all that stuff back and forth for over a year and we didn't know about it. I mean, it's just not possible given our technological capabilities, but I'll be glad to hear additional information. But I was told directly in Iraq that we didn't attack them because the decision had not been made to attack them, and they didn't want to harm anybody. So I'll be glad to call those people a liar that briefed me that we're doing those attacks. Senator Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you said before that none of the European defense ministers has offered to provide troops to creating a safe zone. Have you asked any of them to provide troops for creating a safe zone and to provide an area for Syrian refugees?
We've talked to them about all kinds of capabilities.
Did you ask any of them to provide troops to help create a safe zone?
Well, we believe that the costs outweigh the benefits of a safe zone. So that is
it's
not
safe to say we did not ask them.
I've not asked them for forces for that undertaking. I've asked them persistently for forces of all kinds for undertakings where we think the benefits outweigh the cost, and there are many of those.
And what are the answers that you're getting from the French, from the English, from the Saudis, from the Jordanians?
It varies, but just the French, as I mentioned, were truly galvanized. And I spoke several times to the French defense minister. He came here to the United States. We've talked, and they're doing a great deal more. And I'm sorry about the circumstances that galvanized them.
My expectation is that if you ask the French defense minister for troops for a safe zone, he would probably offer them. Additionally, what I'm trying to find out is, I believe also, like you and like others, when ISIS holds ground, it makes it more dangerous for our own country because they have a safe haven to work out of. And so I have confidence that we're working in Iraq to move them out of Iraq, and then we look at Syria. And so we talk about 100 people in training. They have 20,000 on the ISIS side. How do we get to Raqqa, and when do we get to Raqqa when we are training 100 people? Where do the other people come from?
The people that we are now not only training, in fact, not even principally training, but equipping and enabling are Syrian Arab forces that are working with the Kurdish YPG in the northern part of Syria. They are prepared to advance. They already have, as I indicated, advanced south, and we are enabling them. We're doing more to enable them, and as they do more, we will do yet more to enable them.
Do we have any
And they're the
timeline?
right force to do it, if I may say, because they're Syrian Arabs.
Well, You know, I was in Saudi Arabia, and they said, we want to put in troops to help. Maybe they told you different. Maybe they wouldn't actually do it. But they said they want to put in troops to help. King Abdullah in Jordan said, we want to put in troops to help. So you have Sunnis in Jordan, you have Sunnis in Saudi Arabia who want to put in troops to move the ball to head toward Raqqa. So you have other groups that want to help as well. Do you not want their help, or do you not think that they...
We welcome everything King Abdullah is doing and are very grateful to it. And as I said, I've spoken to the Saudis, and I remind you that that we had the Gulf Cooperation Council leaders to Camp David back in, I think it was April or so, and specifically talked to them about the creation of a Sunni Arab combined force, and that has not
So why can't we ever get that off the ground?
them.
And isn't that the force that gets to Raqqa?
Well, it depends on from one to another, and I would prefer to speak about part of these things privately.
That's
but
fine.
one thing that's very clear in the case of the Saudis, since you mentioned them, has been the Yemen situation, which has preoccupied a lot of the time and energy of their forces as well as their leadership.
I also spoke with some of the Sunni tribal leaders today. They still have extraordinary humanitarian needs. Do we have a plan to work to meet those, because they still have people who are starving?
Yeah, there is. It's the State Department, AID, and various international donors are part of that. I can't speak to that authoritatively. Secretary Kerry could, but it's important to note from the military point of view, from our point of view, because it's an important part of holding territory once it's taken. To give you an example, when Tikrit was retaken, it was important that order be kept, that services be restored, and that humanitarian assistance be rendered, and that's why people are moving back into Tikrit.
I apologize, Mr. Secretary. I have a vote I have to get to. I just want to finish up by saying this. It is strongly believed by me and many others that as long as Raqqa is held and other areas are held, it dramatically increases the chance of another attack in our country. When we ask, when are we going to get to Raqqa and move them out, it's not because we're trying to find a date, it's because it's extraordinarily dangerous to the citizens of this country that they're there. So the sooner, the better that we clear up the clutter with the Saudis, the Jordanians, and move on that city. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned the targeting force. What impact do you expect that force to have on the battlefield?
I'm sorry. Well, I'm hoping it has a very great effect. That's what it's designed to do. I believe it will. We envision a variety of missions for, I want to be careful what I say here, that range from interdicting include individuals on the move, leaders on the move, to the kind of, well, let me give you two examples where we've already employed this technique, because again, I want to be very careful about operational security here. This is a no kidding, force that'll be doing important things. But I think it would help everyone to understand, if you remember the raid that killed Abu Sayyaf, that's an example of the kind of thing that this force could do. Another one was the freeing of 70 prisoners, ISIL prisoners, in which a very heroic action was taken by a soldier, Joshua
Correct.
Wheeler.
We've seen
So there's an
raids.
example of the kinds of things that can be done. And it puts the leadership on notice. It'll get valuable intelligence. It'll free people in the case of that kind of mission. So there's a variety of missions. And
Correct. If I can, we've seen those two raids in the last year and a half. Would you anticipate that we're going to see a greater frequency with this force in the days and weeks and months ahead?
That's absolutely the intent, Senator.
And I would hope we could have general conversations. I realize the sensitivity of this force, but I would hope we could have general conversations about them so we could lay out truly what the goals are when we're talking about the force. Do you have any immediate goals in mind for this targeting force that you can speak about in general terms at this point?
In general terms, they fall in the categories I described: intelligence gathering, interdiction of leadership, key nodes, facilitation, and certainly for you, we can discuss more in a classified setting also. But that's the kind of thing that it's actually a really, to me, to all of us, a very flexible and potent tool. And so we'll learn from experience by using it. One raid builds on another. You know, the Abu Sayyaf raid built on things because we gained understanding, as has been reported.
And you said that we will do more of what works going forward. So I hope in a more classified setting you can lay out those goals so that we can have something to measure the success or failure of these raids by then in the future. I was also interested in knowing, as the number of raids are increasing, will General McFarland receive any authority to help to plan and order that these raids be carried out then?
Yeah, General McFarland is in overall charge of the campaign there. I've made that very clear, and I have great confidence in him, and it's why I created that role, so that we would have one senior leader in charge of the entire campaign covering both Syria and Iraq, and that is General McFarland, who is extremely experienced.
Will he be able to approve those raids by himself, or will he need to come to you or the President?
In many cases, this would be something that he and I think General Austin, remember, also in the chain of command. Otherwise, if they come to me for approval of things that they think require my approval, that's fine too. But there will and there has to be a certain amount of delegation of authority here, so that because for one thing, one expects that raids build upon themselves, and so you're going to want to strike again after you've struck once on the basis of what you've learned from the first strike. So we need to have some significant authority in there.
When you said it's fine too, if they come to you, don't you have that laid out? What a certain plan would be that would require the general then to come to you?
Yes, we do. It's based on their judgment about whether approval at my level is required, and that's generally true. It's perfectly appropriate in this case.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On behalf of Chairman Kane, let me recognize Senator King.
Thank you. Before beginning my questions, several references have been made to a letter which I received in early November from General Austin, which laid out a series of steps that had been taken. I'd like to submit that letter for the record, please. Thank you. Mr. Secretary, it strikes me that this is an exceedingly complex challenge. I guess that's pretty obvious, but part of the problem is we want to defeat ISIS, but we want to do it in such a way that doesn't propagate their ideology around the Muslim world. And that really makes it very difficult. I think the San Bernardino attack is a good example. There's no evidence that I've heard that that attack was directed by ISIS. Instead, these people were self-radicalized and took it upon themselves to perform these heinous acts. The question is, how do we keep moderate Muslims, the vast majority of the 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, from falling into the ISIS trap? And ISIS has made it clear that part of their strategy is to provoke us to westernizing this conflict and making it a war of America and the West against against Islam and thereby pushing heretofore moderate Muslims in their direction. So this gets to the question of how do we take Raqqa, for example, and my understanding is that there's no inclination to use a large contingent of U.S. troops, but there is a recognition, as the President has already acknowledged, that there are places for U.S. troops in a special forces kind of setting. Is this the kind of calculation that you're making?
That's exactly correct, yes.
How do we, the gap in the strategy, it seems to me from the beginning, and I say gap, that's not a criticism, that's just the fact, is where do we get ground troops in Syria? Ground troops are available in Arab ground troops, Muslim ground troops are available in Iraq, the Iraqi security forces, and the Peshmerga. In Syria, there's not an available force, and that's why it seems to me the whole issue of getting rid of Assad is a key part of this calculation, that Assad is the lightning rod that in effect created ISIS, or in part, and if we can work with other parties, particularly Russia, to move Assad off the stage, then you've got an Arab army, a Muslim army in Syria. It's the all of the opposition, except perhaps al-Nusra, and the Syrian army. That's why it seems to me that's a key part of it. But the question that our colleagues are asking is time. Somehow we've got to accelerate the timetable. We can't wait years for Assad to leave and we turn the guns of the opposition and the Syrian army on ISIL. Do you share that?
I do. I mean, as you can hear, I'm all for urgency and acceleration of the military campaign, and I'd like to see that too on the political side. It's trickier. Secretary Kerry's trying to work toward that end, but it is exactly as you say. If we could get a political transition that brought the Syrian armed forces, that part of which it would be appropriate to carry forward into a new Syria, plus the moderate opposition, you'd have a force that could both clear Syrian territory of radicals and eliminate the civil war, which is what fuels the this extremism in the first place, and have a governance of Syria that the Syrian people deserve.
But there's one piece of this, and you mentioned it. You listed a long series of things that we needed to do, and at the very end you said information. And that's where we're losing right now. I heard a figure recently that ISIS posts something like 90,000 posts a day in social media. And just reading a piece about a young man in the U.S., 17 years old, who found this ISIS community online, and he's being encouraged and moved forward. And I know it's not in the Department of Defense, but this country has to do a much better job, it seems to me, of countering the story that ISIS is telling to attract young people across the world. We're not only engaged in a military war here, we're engaged in a war of ideas. And right now, I think we're somewhere close to a stalemate on the military side, but we're losing the war of ideas.
May I just note, Senator, that it is for that very reason that yesterday I got together with the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Director of the FBI, the Director of National Intelligence, and we were talking exactly about that, what the information war. Now, you're right. It's not principally a defense thing. We don't operate here at home. We do operate in the cyber domain. I alluded to that. You know, we're at war, and we have authorities to use our cyber command in this case, and are identifying opportunities to do that. At the same time, I have to say, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Director of National Intelligence are working intensely. They were before San Bernardino. They're working now intensely on exactly this question of these people who are
if we
sitting with a keyboard somewhere in the United States.
If we win a town in Syria and lose 10,000 kids in France or Belgium or Florida or Ohio, that's not victory. I'd hope in the councils of war you will continue to press that point of view. Thank
Will
you.
do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. On behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Wicker, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Always good to have you back, and I do echo what Senator McCain said. I hope you come back more often and share with us your thoughts. Let me let you be explicit on the issue of Bashar Assad, because I hear and I read in the paper, for example, December 7, Bloomberg said Obama no longer seems sure Assad should go. Is that true? Do you believe that Mr. Assad should explicitly be removed from power, or is there a growing feeling that perhaps we ought to team up with Assad?
I think, and I don't want to speak for him, but I think what Secretary Kerry is trying to engineer is the departure of Assad in a way that everyone can support, which, by the way, includes the Russians who have a lot of influence with Assad, so it's important to see if you can get them on the right side of history here, and that accomplishes that, and this is important, quite apart from the atrocities that Assad has committed, in a way that removes him while the structures of the Syrian state are still relatively intact, because to get back to what Senator King was saying a moment ago, we do need there to be, after Assad, a government of Syria that is inclusive, that involves the forces that have been fighting each other, fighting ISIL and governing the territory decently. That is exactly, pardon me, the transition that Secretary Kerry is working on.
Much like we needed in Iraq after the successful invasion. I think I understand what you're saying. But let's get your testimony on this. To your knowledge, is the president still resolute in saying that Assad should go, and that a solution is not that we should begin to work with him?
No, a political transition in which Assad leaves power and is replaced by a more inclusive form of government is the outcome that we're trying to see.
And a political solution in which Assad stays in power, is that acceptable to you?
I think no.
And is it acceptable to the president?
Well, what Secretary Kerry is trying to arrange is what in which he
I
does.
understand what your testimony just was, but we need to get this on the record, and the Americans need an answer to this. It is the president steadfast in having a goal that includes Mr. Assad being removed from power?
Well, that's the path that he has. That's the kind of political transition that he has Secretary of Kerry seeking, yes.
Would you agree that it would be very difficult to convince Syrian rebels to fight only ISIS and not Assad, if that were a direction in which the administration should?
We actually have experience in exactly that matter. And
what is your experience?
The experience is that it's easier to find fighters who are intent upon fighting Assad than to find ones that are intent upon fighting ISIL.
Do you believe Mr. Assad should be removed from power?
Yeah, I think that to have a decent government there that brings the moderate opposition into governance there is going to require the departure of Assad. The how, the when, the where, and so forth is something that Secretary Kerry is negotiating.
Yeah,
the Civil War has gone on a long time, and he's been a lightning rod in that Civil War. And if we want to get it behind us and defeat ISIL and get peace in Syria, I think that's going to be necessary, yeah.
Well, very good. I may try to follow up with some questions on the record there. Let me ask you about no-fly zones. I understand we've had some testimony today about safe zones. And I'll ask you first, Mr. Secretary, and then if you want to ask the general to add his thoughts, that would be good. Safe zone, no-fly zones would allow Syrians to stay in their own country. instead of seeking to become refugees anywhere. They would allow Syrian opposition leaders to exercise sovereignty over Syrian territory. Do you and our coalition partners have the pilots, personnel, and equipment required to establish no-fly zones? And in particular, I think maybe earlier while I was out of the room, there was an attempt to get you to discuss the coalition partners that might be able to enforce this. And do you believe President Putin would challenge our air dominance there and the clearly defined no-fly zones that we would be seeking to enforce? First, you, Secretary Carter.
Sure. On no-fly zones, that's something that I've discussed for the committee before. That's not a step we have recommended, again, because the benefits don't warrant it in light of the costs. I can explain more, but I'm going to ask General Selva, who's done a lot of work on that kind of thing, to comment further. And with respect to the Russians also, he can comment on the memorandum of understanding there and the working relationship we have with the Russian military in the air over Syria right now.
Fair enough. General.
Senator, we have the military capacity to impose a no-fly zone. The question that we need to ask is, do we have the political and policy backdrop with which to do so? And I don't mean that in the case of our government, but in the case of the governments who would challenge the no-fly zone. So if we're asking the question, could we do it, the answer is yes. Are we willing to engage the potential of a conflict, a direct conflict, with the Syrian integrated air defense system or Syrian forces, or by corollary, a miscalculation with the Russians, should they choose to contest the no-fly zone? And those are the questions that have been posed, asked, and answered. And so military capacity, we have the capacity to do this. We have not recommended it because the political situation on the ground and the potential for miscalculation and loss of American life in the air in an attempt to defend the no-fly zone don't warrant the no-fly zone, given the fact that on the ground, the forces would still contest the safe zone on the ground.
Well, I'm way over my time, but let me just say that the Secretary mentioned the cost and benefit. And when I think of the benefit that we could have had in the United States not to be faced with this refugee crisis, the benefit to Europe, if we had given Syrians a place where they could live in their own country safely away from these barrel bombs and these attacks on civilians, it just seems to me that the benefit of doing so, even now, but certainly having done so over time, would have been so enormous that it would have justified whatever cost we might have had to risk. So thank you very much for your answers, and I appreciate the chair indulging me.
General, I must say, it's one of the more embarrassing statements I've ever heard from a uniformed military officer, that we are worried about Syria and Russia's reaction to saving the lives of thousands and thousands of Syrians who are being barrel bombed and massacred. So far, 240,000 of them. Remarkable performance. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary and General Selva, for being here. Mr. Secretary, you noted in your testimony that Russia, which has publicly committed to defeating ISIL, has instead largely attacked opposition forces, and you said it's time for Russia to focus on the right side of this fight. What's it going to take to have Russia turn its attention to fighting ISIL rather than propping up Assad?
I can't speak for the Russians, but I have spoken to the Russians, and I have explained to them why their actions are wrong-headed and counterproductive, even from the point of view of their own security, because it fuels the civil war in Syria, which we've discussed, which is the underlying cause of the radicalization that gave rise to ISIL, which is the very thing they fear. So their actions are, the phrase I've used is pouring gasoline on the civil war in Syria.
So, I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary. So is Russia fully engaged in the discussions to end with Secretary Kerry and some of the other parties that need to be at the table in ending the civil war in Syria? Are they fully engaged in that?
I don't want to speak for Secretary Kerry in that regard. Fully engaged. They are certainly engaged. He's talking to them along the lines that we discussed, along with a range of other parties that will be necessary to a final political transition here.